Now getting into the situation surrounding Shohei Ohtani and Ippei Mitsuhara, where we had some federal investigators sort of come out yesterday and update the public on a lot of the details surrounding this case. It was about a month or so ago when this story first started coming out, as the MLB season was coming to a beginning, when Ippei Mitsuhara was being accused of, quote, a massive theft of at least $4.5 million from Shohei Ohtani. Since then, we found out that $4.5 million was, putting it lightly, he was actually at least $16 million from Ohtani's account to these illegal bookmaking operations in California that Mitsuhara was a part of, and he is now formally being charged with bank fraud after a federal investigation determined that he was involved in illegal wire transfers and impersonating Shohei Ohtani to the bank itself, and all kinds of misdoings that are likely going to end up him sitting in a prison cell for the foreseeable future. The court case is supposed to take place in the next few days, though, so we're not going to have the full results of all of this just yet, but I wanted to sort of talk everything through on where things currently stand in this case. This all happened, of course, as the Dodgers kicked off their season against the San Diego Padres. They were in Korea when federal investigators sort of looked into this illegal bookmaking operation in California, and Shohei Ohtani's name was attached to a couple wire transfers that sparked big-time outrage around really not just the MLB community, but the sports community as a whole. And as the investigators started looking into it, Ippei Mitsuhara stepped up and said that he was responsible. Now, he didn't say that he was responsible until at first he took full acknowledgement of the fact that he was gambling, but at first he said that Shohei Ohtani was aware of this and helped him to pay it off. Since then, though, he has recanted that statement, and as things sort of looked, as this investigation was starting off, it was looking into whether or not Shohei Ohtani did have any knowledge of this situation as a whole. And as things currently stand, Ohtani is being labeled as a victim. So some of the details surrounding this case: Mitsuhara placed approximately 19,000 bets from November of 2021 to January of 2024. With that rate, people are pointing to the fact that that would mean Mitsuhara was being involved in 25 bets a day. The average wager was 12.8 thousand, and he lost a total of 40.7 million. Definitely goes to show how dangerous gambling can be as an addiction. But Mitsuhara in this situation was connected to one of the biggest stars in the sports world in Shohei Ohtani, who had more than enough money to cover his debts. But not just that, was somebody who very much relied on Mitsuhara for his everyday life. And considering the fact that Ohtani does not speak very much English, and Mitsuhara was with him everywhere, they developed a very close personal relationship, which is why this came as such a shock to Ohtani and was such a backstabbing. But again, federal investigators made it very clear that Ohtani is the victim in this situation. Mitsuhara is being charged, and we'll sort of dive into the logistics of how he was able to pull all of this off. But Martin Estrada, the attorney of the Central District of California, said, quote, "There is no evidence to indicate that Mr. Ohtani authorized the over $16 million of transfers from his bank account to the bookmakers." And I know that there are going to be a lot of people who are sort of running with conspiracy theories about how this is a fall guy situation and that Ohtani is actually guilty in all of this. So we're just going to lay out the details because it was very confusing even when we first started talking about this situation. I still believe that Ohtani was innocent, but a lot of things weren't lining up from the timeline of how this all played out, from the conflicting statements of Mitsuhara when he first talked to investigators, and the pure fact of how do you not notice $4.5 million stolen, let alone $16 million. So, Ohtani won't be going through. The idea that if Ohtani wasn't going to go through with charging Mitsuhara would mean that he was guilty, that he didn't want Mitsuhara to go to court and speak in front of law enforcers and potentially get himself caught. That was something that a lot of people were pointing to. There were a lot of questions about whether or not Ohtani would go through with actually charging Mitsuhara. Now that is the case, and for no matter how much money really in these Fall Guys situations, Mitsuhara is looking at a potential jail sentence of 30 years. Now, it's likely going to be less time than that, but still, I don't think that Mitsuhara would be willing to sort of face this type of punishment just in order to cover up a situation here for gambling debts if Ohtani was involved with that. The FBI also does not care about the reputation of the MLB. I know that there are going to be people out there talking about how this is a cover-up situation. The reality is this federal investigative crew is not worrying about whether or not the MLB's reputation is going to be harmed by this. The whole reason they got involved with this was to take down an illegal bookmaking operation for this man with the last name of Boyer in California, where sports gambling is illegal, and they happen to stumble into this big time name of Shohei Ohtani. The FBI wouldn't cover things up in this situation. They have nothing to benefit from the MLB's reputation being upheld. So I think that the investigators are legitimately doing everything they can to sort of get to the bottom of this. And as things currently stand, based off of the way that they have found out information over this time, it does appear that Ohtani is the victim. So wanted to talk about the order of events a little bit, because one of the biggest questions is, well, how did Mitsuhara have that type of power over Ohtani's bank account? It was reported, or found out, I should say, that Mitsuhara actually helped Ohtani set up his bank account back in 2018 when Ohtani joined the Angels, came overseas, and Mitsuhara helped set up that first bank account where Ohtani's salary went to. And Mitsuhara, quote, refused to give access to the account to the rest of Ohtani's other professional advisors, including his agent, accountant, and financial advisor, telling them Ohtani wanted to keep that account private, which is another example, specifically when you look at that last point where Mitsuhara told, and maybe at the time Ohtani did legitimately want to keep the account private, but it's an example of the type of power that Mitsuhara had over Ohtani because of the fact that there was the language barrier and these other people couldn't directly speak to Ohtani in full without Mitsuhara being a part of it. Mitsuhara then met Boyer at a poker game in 2021 and got under his sports book, started gambling later that year. He changed the contact information then at some point along the lines on Ohtani's bank account to link the account to Mitsuhara's phone number and an email address that Mitsuhara had control of. The FBI even recovered phone calls between Mitsuhara and Ohtani's bank where Mitsuhara pretended to be Ohtani and approved these massive wire transfers. Ohtani was fully cooperative in his own right to cooperate with this investigation, answered all the questions investigators were looking at. He gave up his phone to be searched by the FBI. They didn't find anything that would indicate he knew anything about these wire transfers. and now Mitsuhara is facing up to 30 years in prison. So obviously a ton going on in this type of a situation. Now it sort of does, again, unless any crazy twist were to take place during the court hearing, it seems like this is now sort of less a story about Shohei Ohtani and more about Ippei Mitsuhara. The MLB does have the option, if they do find anything suspicious about the story and how this plays out, they can further look into the situation surrounding Ohtani. If you are, again, one of these conspiracy theorists that talks about a cover-up, this is a situation where I find it very hard to believe that the MLB is going to do any real further investigation on the situation, because they absolutely benefit from the reputation of Shohei Ohtani, the league's biggest star. But as for the FBI, they really have no incentive to try and protect somebody like Shohei Ohtani. So the lying and the covering up would have to come from Ippei Mitsuhara himself, who is now potentially facing this amount of jail time. And I think that it is very unlikely that he would be willing to go through a sentence for, again, maximum is 30. Let's even call it 10, 15 years. I think that that is a very unlikely situation that he would be willing to serve that time if he were not guilty in this situation. He is currently pleading guilty to the sequence of events. Again, we're going to have more stories coming out. He's going to be tried in Los Angeles, and we'll have some more stories coming out from there. But again, this was one of the more shocking stories that have taken place in recent time, and it does seem like Ohtani is going to be off the hook, which, again, is absolutely a good thing for the MLB. And really, if you're a fan of baseball and sports, it's pretty weird, I think, how many people were sort of hoping that Ohtani would be guilty in all of this. Now, again, I'm not saying you were wrong necessarily for having questions when this first came out, because it was a very messy story at the beginning, but sort of as we get all these details and everything is coming out in full, I do believe that we have to believe what the FBI has sort of put out there. It does go to speak, again, the sort of dangers of having these other people surrounding professional athletes, especially ones who have a language barrier, and what type of power they can have over an athlete. I'm sure this is going to be a little bit of a cautionary tale for the next handful of years, especially considering the fact that Ohtani and Mitsuhara were supposedly as close as they were, seeming to be best friends, and this was all going on in the background. Extremely damaging. Now, again, I say damaging. Ohtani at least has a massive amount of money that typically, if they get $16 million stolen from them, that can be, the sky is falling, your life is falling apart. For Ohtani, who just signed a $700 million deal, clearly it is, strange to some degree that Ohtani didn't notice, but also the way that Mitsuhara went into the account to not allow Ohtani to get notifications about any of these big-time wire transfers. The fact that from the bank's perspective, they had a phone call with Ohtani who approved all of these massive transfers, so they didn't have to sort of take any secondary measures to make sure that this was legitimate, because Mitsuhara was pretending to be Ohtani during these phone calls. That whatever, I don't know if the details of the bank themselves have been fully released in terms of where it was, but they got to be feeling pretty bad about themselves that they were able to be tricked over like this, and I'm sure some of their security procedures are going to be changing going forward. But Let me know what you think about this situation as a whole. I do think that it is a great thing that Ohtani should be able to just move on from this situation, focus on playing baseball and being one of the best athletes in the world, really. But we're going to be taking our first break here, and when we come back on the other side, we will be diving into the news that broke last night about Kentucky hiring Mark Pope as their next head coach. So stick with us, and we will be right back.